The scent of garlic and ginger sizzling in hot oil was the anchor of Liana's world. It was 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and her small kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Quinoa bubbling on one burner, broccoli steaming on another, and the ancient cast-iron skillet, a wedding gift from her own mother, bearing the glorious foundation of her stir-fry. From the living room, the tinny sounds of her 7-year-old son, Leo's educational tablet game, mingled with the low hum of the evening news her husband, Mark, was half watching while scrolling through his phone. "Mama, does broccoli have feelings?" Leo called out, padding into the kitchen in his dinosaur socks. "Only about being delicious," Liana said, wiping her hands on her apron, a faded, embroidered one that read "Kiss the Cook" in Hungarian, a language she didn't speak, but whose sentiment she'd inherited from Mark's grandmother, Alara. She dropped a piece of broccoli onto his waiting tongue. "Verdict?" He chewed, his face serious. "Needs soy sauce, and maybe a hug." Liana laughed, the sound momentarily lifting the ever-present weight on her shoulders. This was her life, a mosaic of small, precious moments set against a backdrop of relentless fatigue. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, a career she'd meticulously carved out after Leo was born, a testament to her quiet resilience. Mark's job in logistics was stable but demanding, his mind often miles away, tethered to spreadsheets and supply chains. The family pillar, the one who seemed to hold the very roof of their lives aloft with effortless grace, was Eleanor, Mark's mother. She lived 20 minutes away in the same neat, rose-trellised bungalow where Mark had grown up. Every Thursday, like liturgical ritual, she arrived with a ceramic dish, a chicken pot pie, a baked ziti, a lemon drizzle cake, and a perceptive eye that missed nothing. "You're working too hard, my dear," Eleanor would say, her voice like warm honey as she rearranged Liana's already arranged vase of grocery store tulips. "Let me take Leo to the park. You rest." Her kindness was a blanket, soft and smothering. She remembered every doctor's appointment, bought Leo shoes he'd outgrow in 3 months, and had an uncanny ability to reference, gently, the bridesmaid's dress Liana had worn when she'd married Mark, as if that day was the pinnacle of Liana's existence. Liana was grateful, truly, but gratitude, she was learning, could coexist with a slow, sinking feeling of erasure. In Alara's eyes, she was Mark's wife, Leo's mother, the keeper of their home. But the Liana who'd backpacked across Southeast Asia alone, who'd won the state debate championship, who dreamed of illustrating a children's book, that Liana was fading, like a photograph left in the sun. The cracks began as hairline fractures, a missed school event because of a client deadline, which Alara covered with a cheerful, "Don't you worry, I've got it," but her tone implied a failing, a quiet disagreement with Mark about saving for a family trip, which Alara somehow referenced the next week. Mark always did love those beach holidays as a boy, so important for a child. Liana felt herself being edited, her paragraphs rewritten in someone else's flowing script. Then, one overcast Thursday, the ceramic dish Alara brought was a shepherd's pie, and tucked under its tea towel, like a serpent in a basket, was a plain manila envelope. "For you, Liana," Eleanor said, her smile not quite reaching her tired, kind eyes. "I was going through some of my old files and found some things you should have. Legal things. It's always best to be prepared, darling." Puzzled, Liana waited until Alara had left, kissing a flour-dusted Leo goodbye. She sat at the kitchen table, the envelope feeling cold and alien amidst the crumbs of their afternoon snack. She slid out the contents. On top was a copy of her own prenuptial agreement, a document she'd signed blithely a decade ago, a blur of white dress and champagne bubbles. Paperclipped to it was a crisp, annotated list from a legal website titled "Grounds for Contested Divorce in Your State," with several points highlighted in delicate yellow: irreconcilable differences, emotional neglect, prioritizing career over family. Underneath that was a printed email chain between Alara and a renowned divorce attorney, inquiring about retainer fees and strategies for ensuring maximum stability for the grandson. The world did not tilt. The clock on the microwave continued its steady blink, but the symphony in Liana's kitchen dissolved into a deafening white noise silence. This was not meddling. This was a meticulously plotted coup. The kindness, the casseroles, the park visits, they weren't just grandmotherly love, they were intelligence gathering, a campaign to prove Liana's inadequacy. The ultimate gift, wrapped in concern, was divorce papers in waiting. She didn't cry. A strange, cold calm settled over her. She felt like a chess piece that had just been told it was disposable, only to look down and realize it had been a queen all along. The revenge plot came not in a flash of fury, but in the slow, steady drip of memory. It was the week of the annual Army Ball. Mark, a captain in the Army Reserve, attended every year. It was a major event in Eleanor's social calendar, a chance to see her son in his dress uniform, to bask in reflected glory, to play the proud matriarch. Liana had always gone, wearing a rented dress, smiling politely at officers' wives, feeling like a guest in her own life's military chapter. This year would be different. The theme was a legacy of honor. Liana RSVP'd for 2. She told Mark she'd found the perfect dress. She told Alara nothing. The next month was a secret life, lived in the margins. While designing logos and packing lunches, Liana was plotting. She found the dress not in a rental shop, but in the back of her own closet. It was her mother's, a simple, elegant column of emerald green satin from the 1970s, which Liana had always adored. She took it to a tailor, a wizened Vietnamese woman with pins in her mouth, who transformed it, taking it in at the waist, letting out the hem into a slight train. "Strong shoulders," the tailor muttered, and Liana nodded. Yes, strong shoulders. She didn't hire a sitter for Leo. Instead, she called upon her own mother, Maria, who lived 3 hours away and whose love was a loud, messy, affirming roar, the antithesis of Eleanor's gentle smothering. "Mija, you shine," Maria said over the phone, her voice thick with emotion. "You shine so bright they'll need sunglasses." The night of the ball arrived. Alara came over early, as was tradition, to help. She was dressed in a tasteful lavender suit, her pearls perfect. She fussed with Leo's hair as Liana remained hidden in the bedroom. "Where's your dress, dear?" Eleanor called, a note of concern in her voice. "We don't want to be late." "I'm ready," Liana said, opening the door. She stepped out. The emerald silk whispered against her legs. The dress fit her like a second skin, honoring the curves motherhood and work and life had given her. Her hair, usually in a practical bun, was down in soft waves. She wore no necklace, only the simple pearl studs Mark had given her for their first anniversary. But on her wrist was a thick silver cuff, an heirloom from her own grandmother, a refugee who had built a farm from nothing. Mark's jaw dropped slack. "Liana, you look stunning," Eleanor finished, but her smile was brittle. The script was already fraying. This was not the rented, anonymous Liana she expected. The ball was held in a grand hotel ballroom, all brass and crimson and glittering chandeliers. As they entered, eyes turned, not just to Mark in his dress blues, but to her. She held his arm, not clinging, but with a quiet, assured partnership. Eleanor floated into her element, greeting fellow military parents, her eyes constantly darting back to Liana, a flicker of unease in them. The moment came after dinner, as the band began to play a slow, swelling waltz. It was tradition for the commanding officer and his wife to lead, then for other couples to join. As Mark turned to Liana, Eleanor appeared, touching his arm. "Darling, General Bryson is here with his new wife. You really should go pay your respects. It's important for your career." It was a masterstroke, a public, unassailable prioritizing of her son's legacy over his wife's moment. Mark hesitated, conflict on his face. Liana simply smiled. She leaned and kissed his cheek. Of course, duty calls. She saw the relief in Mark's eyes and the subtle triumph in Alara's. Then she walked, not off the floor, but across it. She walked past the whispering couples, past the senior officers, straight to a table where a man in a short suit sat with a much younger date. He was a client from years ago, a publishing executive for whom she'd designed a book series. He'd always been charming, borderline flirtatious. "Liana," he boomed, standing. "My God, you look incredible." "Hello, Robert," she said, her voice clear. "I've been meaning to call you. I've finished the mock-ups for the children's book series we discussed, the one about the little girl who maps the stars in her backyard. I think it's some of my best work." Robert's professional interest immediately sparked. "You finished them? Liana, that's fantastic. The acquisition team is meeting next week. Email them to me first thing Monday." They spoke for 5 minutes about spreads and color palettes, about publishers in New York. Liana was animated, her hands drawing shapes in the air, her laugh ringing out, genuine and unforced. She was no longer just Captain's wife. She was Liana Vasquez, illustrator, creator. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Eleanor, frozen near General Bryson, watching the scene. The triumph had evaporated, replaced by utter confusion. But Liana wasn't done. She excused herself from Robert and moved through the crowd again. She found Sergeant Miller, whose wife Jess was one of Liana's few real friends on base. Jess was home with a newborn. Liana spent 10 minutes asking him detailed, thoughtful questions about the baby, about Jess's recovery, offering specific days she could come over with meals. She saw the grateful sag in his shoulders. Then she sought out the young, nervous-looking wife of a freshly commissioned lieutenant, sitting alone, looking lost. Liana sat beside her. "The first one is always the most overwhelming," she said, her voice warm. "The trick is the shoes. Next year, bring blister band-aids in your clutch. It's a lifesaver." The girl's face flooded with relief. Liana became a quiet, graceful whirlwind. She discussed a charity fundraiser with the colonel's wife. She remembered the name of the bartender's son who'd been ill. She moved through the room not as an appendage, but as a central connecting node. She was building a network, not of power, but of shared humanity, right under the glittering chandeliers. When Mark finally returned, drawn by the invisible current of his wife's sudden magnetic presence, he found her surrounded by a small, laughing group. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if for the first time in years, not as the woman who managed his home, but as a woman of substance, of grace, of quiet power. The band struck up Unchained Melody. Mark, wordlessly, held out his hand. Liana took it. As they moved onto the floor, his grip was firm, his eyes searching hers. "What was all that?" he whispered into her hair. "Just being prepared," she whispered back, the ghost of a smile on her lips. They danced, and for the first time in a long time, they were in sync. Eleanor watched from the shadows, her lavender suit seeming to pale against the vivid truth of the woman in green. Her revenge, Liana knew, was not in humiliation or confrontation. It was in revelation. She had revealed herself to Mark, to the community, and most importantly, to herself. She had revealed Eleanor's gift for what it was, a profound miscalculation. The ride home was silent. When they walked in, Maria was asleep on the couch, Leo curled beside her under a crocheted blanket. The familiar, loving mess of their home welcomed them. Leo's drawings on the fridge, a stack of Liana's design tablets by the computer, Mark's boots by the door. A few days later, Eleanor came on her usual Thursday. There was no ceramic dish. Her hands were empty. She looked older, the lines on her face not just from smiles. They sat at the kitchen table, the site of the original wound. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "I thought I was protecting him," Eleanor said finally, her voice raw. "Protecting the family, the way I'd always done." She looked at Liana, and for the first time, Liana saw not a strategist, but a scared woman who had built her entire identity on being the keystone, and who saw in Liana's independence not a strength, but a threat to the arch. "I never expected," she trailed off. "What?" Liana asked softly, not with malice, but with genuine curiosity. "I never expected you," Eleanor said, a tear finally tracing its way down her powdered cheek. "I saw the dress, the career, the way you held yourself. I saw a legacy I didn't understand, one that was stronger than any paper I could give you." Liana reached across the table. She didn't take Eleanor's hand, but she placed her own, with its silver cuff, firmly on the wood between them, an offering, not a surrender. "It's not a different legacy, Eleanor," she said. "It's the same one. It's the legacy of women who hold things together. You did it with casseroles and garden clubs. I do it with color palettes and bedtimes. It's the same work. We just use different tools." It was not a swift or perfect forgiveness. Trust, once fractured, mends slowly, like a bone. But a new understanding began, built not on assumed roles, but on witnessed strength. That following Thursday, Eleanor arrived with a ceramic dish, her famous apple crisp. But she also brought a tattered, beautiful old book of fairy tales from her own childhood. "For Leo," she said, "but I thought maybe you could read them to him. The illustrations are lovely. Perhaps they'll inspire you." And as Liana took the book, their fingers brushing over the worn cover, she felt it. Not a victory, but a connection. A thread, thin but strong, being woven between their two kinds of love, their two forms of resilience. It was a thread that would now hold the tapestry of their family together in all its complex, beautiful, everyday glory. The simmering pot on the stove, the child's question from the other room, the silent understanding passing between two women who at last had truly seen each other. This was the heart of the story, and it was just beginning.